Imagine this. You're standing at the altar, about to say, "I do" to someone you barely know, because that's the deal your family made. A simple arrangement, no emotions, just a signature away from a lifetime commitment. But what if, right at that moment, fate decided to throw a curveball so wild, so unpredictable, that your entire life flipped upside down? That's exactly what happened in this story, and trust me, by the end of this video, you'll get the shocking answer to the question that brought you here. Stick around, because if you've ever wondered whether destiny has a mind of its own, this story will make you believe it does. Let's talk about control, or rather, the illusion of it. We like to think we're the ones calling the shots, that every decision we make is ours alone. But what if I told you that sometimes, the universe has other plans? Plans so bizarre, so perfectly timed, that you can't help but wonder, was this always meant to happen? That's the unsettling truth our main character, Alicia, had to face. She was practical, logical, the kind of person who believed love was a choice, not some uncontrollable force. So when her parents arranged her marriage to Rohan, a wealthy businessman with a flawless reputation, she agreed. It made sense. No messy emotions, no heartbreak. Just a partnership built on mutual respect. But destiny? Oh, destiny was laughing in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to prove her wrong. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like life was leading you somewhere, even when you fought against it? Like there's an invisible thread pulling you toward a moment you never saw coming? That's exactly what started happening to Alicia. Small things at first, strange coincidences, dreams that felt too real, a face in the crowd that made her heart race for no reason. And then, he appeared. Jay. The one person who shouldn't have been there. The one person who made her question everything. The chemistry between them was electric, undeniable, the kind that makes you forget logic, forget duty, forget every rational thought you've ever had. And that's where our real story begins. Because this wasn't just about love. This was about secrets, about a past that refused to stay buried, about a deal that was far from simple. I know what you're thinking. Asterisk, how does this end? Asterisk, does Alicia follow duty or desire? Does the arranged marriage go forward, or does destiny rewrite the script? Here's the thing. I could tell you, but where's the fun in that? Instead, I'll let you in on a little secret. The answer is worse, and better, than you could ever imagine. Because just when you think you've figured it out, the truth hits like a thunderbolt. And trust me, you'll want to stay till the very last second to find out what that truth is. So, are you ready to see how this unfolds? Let's dive in. But before we go any further, let me warn you. Nothing in this story is what it seems. And by the time you realize just how deep the deception runs, it'll already be too late. Alicia had always believed she was in control of her life, until the universe decided to test that belief in the most brutal way possible. Growing up in a traditional Indian American family, she understood the weight of expectations. Her parents, successful doctors who had built their lives from scratch after immigrating to the US, had one unspoken rule: stability over everything. That's why when they introduced her to Rohan, the son of their oldest family friends, it wasn't a suggestion. It was the next logical step. He was handsome, Harvard-educated, and from a lineage just as polished as hers. On paper they were perfect. But paper doesn't account for the way your pulse races when someone's eyes lock onto yours from across a crowded room, or how a single touch can send your carefully constructed world spiraling into chaos. That someone was Jay, mysterious, intense, and completely, undeniably wrong for her in every way that mattered. The first time she saw him was at her engagement party, a lavish affair held at her parents' sprawling estate in Connecticut. He wasn't on the guest list. No one seemed to know who had invited him, and yet, there he was, leaning against the far wall with a smirk that suggested he knew something no one else did. When their eyes met, Alicia felt something shift inside her, an unsettling familiarity, as if she'd known him in another life. He didn't belong in her world of champagne toasts and polite conversation, yet he carried himself like he owned the room. Later that night, she caught him watching her from the shadows as she argued with Rohan about something trivial, something she couldn't even remember now. But she did remember the way Jay's gaze burned into her, like he could see every secret she'd ever tried to hide. What Alicia didn't know was that Jay wasn't just some random stranger crashing an engagement party. He was a ghost from a past she didn't remember. 10 years ago, before her family moved to the States, there had been an accident. A fire. A life-altering night that her parents had spent years trying to erase from her memory. Jay knew the truth, and he wasn't there by coincidence. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her, because the deal her parents had made wasn't just about marriage. It was about burying a secret so deep, no one would ever dare dig it up again. But secrets have a way of clawing their way back to the surface, especially when the right person starts pulling at the threads. Meanwhile, Rohan wasn't as oblivious as he seemed. He had noticed the way Alicia's breath hitched whenever Jay was near, the way her laughter sounded forced when they were together. At first, he told himself it was nothing, just pre-wedding jitters. But then the texts started. Anonymous messages hinting at things he wasn't supposed to know. Ask her about the fire. Do you really think she chose you? And the one that made his blood run cold. You're just the placeholder. He had his own secrets, his own reasons for agreeing to this marriage, and if Jay was threatening to expose them, then this was no longer just about love, it was about survival. As the days blurred together, Alicia found herself torn between two worlds. One was safe, predictable, a life where every step had been planned out for her. The other was reckless, intoxicating, a path that led straight into the unknown with a man who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. But the more time she spent with Jay, the more the fragments of her forgotten past began to resurface. Flashes of smoke and screaming, a promise made in the dark, a betrayal so deep it had rewritten her destiny before she even had a chance to choose. And then there was the envelope. Left on her doorstep with no note, no return address, just a single photograph inside, a picture of her as a child, standing next to a boy who looked eerily like Jay. Scrawled on the back were 3 words. Remember the promise. That's when she realized, this wasn't just a love story. It was a reckoning. Someone wanted her to remember, and the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. Because in this world of arranged marriages and hidden agendas, the real question wasn't who she would choose, it was who would let her walk away alive. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived like a storm rolling in, tense, electric, and impossible to ignore. Alicia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the emerald green sari her mother had insisted she wear, the fabric heavy with unspoken expectations. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger. Someone playing the part of the perfect bride while her mind raced with unanswered questions. The photograph of her and Jay as children had shattered any illusion that their connection was random, but every time she tried to grasp the memory, it slithered away like smoke. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to her. As she slipped out the back door, the humid air clung to her skin, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her like a physical force. Jay was waiting by the old oak tree at the edge of the property, just as he'd promised in the note he'd slipped into her purse earlier. The moonlight carved sharp shadows across his face, making him look more like a phantom than a man. "You came," he said, his voice rough with something that sounded like relief. Alicia didn't waste time. "Who are you really?" she demanded, her hands trembling at her sides. Jay's expression darkened, and for a heartbeat, she saw the boy from the photograph, the one who had once looked at her like she was his entire world. "You used to call me Jai," he said quietly. "Before the fire. Before your parents took you away and made sure you forgot everything. Including me." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Jai. The name echoed in her mind, stirring something deep and buried. But before she could respond, the sound of snapping twigs made them both freeze. Rohan stepped out of the shadows, his face a mask of cold fury. "I knew it," he spat, his eyes flicking between them. "You've been lying to me this whole time." What happened next unfolded in a blur. Rohan lunged at Jay, his movements sharp with a violence Alicia had never seen in him. They crashed to the ground, fists flying, until a voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough!" Alicia's father stood at the edge of the clearing, his usually composed face twisted with something she couldn't name. Fear? Guilt? Behind him, her mother clutched a faded leather-bound book to her chest, her knuckles white. "This ends now," her father said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Jay wiped blood from his lip and let out a bitter laugh. "It ended the night you set that fire," he said, his gaze locking onto Alicia's. "Ask them what really happened. Ask them why they're so desperate to marry you off to him." Rohan stiffened, his eyes darting to Alicia's parents. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed, but the panic in his voice was unmistakable. Alicia felt the ground tilt beneath her. This wasn't just about a broken childhood promise or a love triangle. It was about something darker, something her parents had spent years burying. The leather book in her mother's hands seemed to pulse with secrets, And suddenly, she knew. Whatever was in those pages was the key to everything. But before she could demand the truth, headlights sliced through the darkness, followed by the screech of tires. A black SUV skidded to a halt, and two men in suits stepped out. Men Alicia had never seen before, but the way her father paled told her everything she needed to know. "You were supposed to keep her away from him," one of the men said, his voice eerily calm. "Now we have to clean up your mess." The world narrowed to a single horrifying realization. None of this was an accident. Not the arranged marriage, not Jay's sudden appearance, not even the fire all those years ago. She had been a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and the players were finally showing their hands. As the men advanced, Jay grabbed her wrist and yanked her behind him, his body tense like a coiled spring. "Run!" he whispered, but it was too late. The last thing Alicia saw before everything went black was Rohan pulling something from his jacket, a gun, glinting under the moonlight, and the look on his face wasn't anger. It was resignation. Like he'd known this moment would come all along. The gunshot never came. Instead, a deafening crash shattered the night as another car rammed into the black SUV, sending the suited men sprawling. Alicia barely had time to register what was happening before she was dragged into a van, Jay's grip iron tight around her wrist as the vehicle peeled away. Her parents' shouts faded into the distance, swallowed by the roar of the engine. Inside the van, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor handed her a file. "You deserve to know the truth," she said, flipping it open to reveal a birth certificate, Alicia's, but with a different last name. And next to it, a faded newspaper clipping. Asterisk prominent family's heiress missing after devastating fire. Asterisk the date was from 20 years ago. The girl in the photo was her. Jay's voice cut through her shock. "Your parents aren't your parents, Alicia. They took you. The fire was a cover-up. You were supposed to die that night with your real family." The words hit like a sledgehammer, but deep down, she'd always felt it. The way her mother flinched when she asked about her childhood, the way her father's smile never quite reached his eyes. The arranged marriage to Rohan wasn't just about tradition. It was about keeping her tied to the people who'd stolen her life. And Rohan? He was in on it. His family had helped orchestrate the kidnapping, a business deal sealed with blood and lies. But Jay had been there that night. He was the boy next door, the one who'd tried to save her. And he'd spent the last 2 decades searching for her. The van screeched to a halt at a secluded safe house, where Alicia's real uncle, a man she'd never met, waited with tears in his eyes. The pieces of her past finally clicked into place. The fortune her parents had built was hers by birthright, and they'd been desperate to secure it through Rohan before she ever found out. But the biggest twist came when Rohan himself appeared at the door, bruised but alive, holding a USB drive. "I couldn't go through with it," he said, his voice raw. "I was supposed to marry you to keep you quiet. But when I saw you with Jay, I remembered the girl from the stories my father told. The one who deserved justice." The drive contained proof, emails, bank records, even a confession from Alicia's so-called parents. In the end, the truth was more shocking than she could have imagined. The fire, the kidnapping, the arranged marriage. It was all about money and power. But love, that was real. Jay had risked everything to find her, not for revenge, but because he'd never stopped believing she was alive. And as the authorities closed in on the people who'd stolen her life, Alicia made her choice. She stood in front of the cameras, holding Jay's hand, and reclaimed her name. The media called it the miracle reunion, but for her, it was something simpler: freedom. The final twist? Rohan wasn't the villain. He was a pawn, just like her. His redemption came when he handed over the evidence that would put his own father behind bars. And as for Alicia's fake parents? They never saw her coming. The last time she saw them, they were in handcuffs, their empire crumbling around them. But the real kicker? The fortune they'd fought so hard to keep? She donated half of it to missing children's organizations. Because some stories don't end with revenge. They end with justice. And hers was just beginning. So what's the takeaway? Destiny might write the first draft, but we hold the pen. And sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't the ones we choose. They're the ones that choose us. If this story taught you anything, let it be this: the truth might hurt, but lies will destroy you. And if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, remember Alicia's choice. Because in the end, the only deal that matters is the one you make with yourself. The real turning point came 3 months in, when Alexander asked her to move in with him. Not into some penthouse downtown, but to his estate just outside the city. A sprawling, secluded property with gates that locked from the inside. For privacy, he'd said. For us. But the moment she stepped through those doors, she felt it, the weight of something unspoken, something off. The staff never quite met her eyes. The security cameras weren't just at the entrances, they were everywhere. And then there was the locked wing on the third floor, the one Alexander told her was just storage. But late one night, she could have sworn she heard footsteps coming from behind that door. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Because this isn't just a story about a girl who fell for a wealthy man. It's about what happens when the fairy tale starts to crack. When the money, the glamour, the promises begin to unravel, and you're left staring at the truth underneath. And the truth? Alexander Carter wasn't just dangerous because of what he'd done. He was dangerous because of what he needed from her. A role she hadn't signed up for. A game where the rules changed by the hour. And the terrifying realization that walking away might not be an option anymore. So tell me this. Would you stay? Would you ignore the whispers, the warnings, the gut feeling screaming at you to run? Or would you dig deeper, no matter the cost? Because Emily's about to make her choice. And trust me, you won't see it coming. The night Emily decided to investigate the locked wing of Alexander's estate, she told herself it was just curiosity. A harmless peek to quiet the nagging voice in her head. But as she slipped the key she'd stolen from his office into the lock, her hands trembled with something deeper than nerves. The door creaked open to reveal not storage boxes or forgotten furniture, but a meticulously organized space that looked more like a command center than a spare room. Walls lined with surveillance feeds, files labeled with names she didn't recognize, and a single photograph pinned to a corkboard that made her blood run cold. Her own face, circled in red, with a date scribbled beneath it from before they'd even met. That's when she heard the click of heels behind her. Lena stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but there was no smirk this time. Just a grim resignation. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," she said, stepping inside and locking the door behind her. What followed wasn't the confrontation Emily expected. No threats, no lies. Instead, Lena handed her a flash drive and a warning. Asterisk, he doesn't love you. He recruits women like you. Smart, ambitious, in debt. Women who'll overlook red flags for a way out. Asterisk, the files on that drive told a story Emily's mind could barely process. Alexander wasn't just wealthy. He was a fixer for people so powerful, they operated beyond governments. And his role? To find vulnerable women, mold them into perfect companions, and then, leverage them. Some disappeared. Others became pawns in high-stakes deals. But Lena was different. She'd been like Emily once, until she'd refused to play her part. The real twist? Lena wasn't just a warning. She was an offer. A shadowy group had been tracking Alexander for years, and they needed someone on the inside to finally take him down. "You walk away now, he'll erase you," Lena whispered. Asterisk, but if you stay and help us, you might just survive. Asterisk, Emily's breath came in short gasps as the reality crashed over her. This wasn't just about escaping a toxic relationship. It was about dismantling a system where women like her were collateral. And the most terrifying part? Alexander's next client meeting was in 2 days. A private jet waiting to take her to an island with no extradition treaties. Back in her room, Emily stared at her packed suitcase, the one Alexander had so thoughtfully prepared for her trip. Every item was chosen, every detail controlled. Even the perfume was his favorite, not hers. Outside, the estate's gates loomed like teeth in the moonlight. She could run now, but the surveillance meant he'd find her. Or she could get on that plane, play the perfect girlfriend, and let Lena's team track her to a place where no one could hear her scream. The clock was ticking, and every choice was a gamble. But the biggest shock of all? The flash drive had contained one more file, a video of Alexander with another woman, whispering the exact words he'd said to Emily on their first date. Word for word. Like it was all a script. So here's the question burning in your mind right now. What would you do in her place? Would you run and risk disappearing? Or would you step onto that plane, knowing it might be the last decision you ever make? Because in the next 24 hours, Emily's going to discover that the worst thing about Alexander isn't his lies. It's the truth he's been hiding about why he chose her. And folks, you are not ready for what comes next. Emily stepped onto the private jet with a smile so convincing even she almost believed it. The cabin was all plush leather and champagne flutes, but her fingers curled around the flash drive hidden in her pocket like a lifeline. Alexander kissed her forehead and murmured something about trust being the foundation of love, words that now tasted like poison. As the engines roared to life, she watched the estate shrink beneath them, wondering if she'd ever see solid ground again. What Lena hadn't told her was that the island wasn't just a hideaway, it was a proving ground. And the woman on the video? She'd been there too. Until she failed her test. For 3 days, Emily played her role perfectly. She laughed at Alexander's jokes, admired the sunset over the infinity pool, and pretended not to notice the armed men patrolling the perimeter. But at night, she scoured his encrypted files using codes Lena had provided, uncovering a truth more horrifying than she'd imagined. Alexander wasn't just trafficking secrets. He was auctioning lives. The clients weren't businessmen. They were predators bidding on women who'd been groomed to be perfect companions. And Emily's file? It included a buyer's signature already dried on the dotted line. The date matched the one circled on her photo. Tomorrow night, she'd be someone else's problem. The climax came during the gala Alexander threw on their final evening. Hundreds of candles flickered as wealthy guests toasted to new beginnings. Emily's dress, strapless, sapphire, chosen by him, itched like a straitjacket. When the fireworks began, she slipped into his office and triggered Lena's failsafe, a malware program that sent every incriminating file to Interpol, the FBI, and 3 major news outlets simultaneously. But as alarms blared and the island's power grid failed, Alexander burst in, his charm evaporating into something feral. "I knew you were special," he hissed. But betrayal? That's my specialty. What happened next was a blur. Lena's team storming the compound, gunfire echoing off marble floors, Emily sprinting through palm trees as the sky burned orange behind her.